I don't think I've ever played a game that was quite as difficult as Titan Souls, or at least in the same way that Titan Souls is. While comparisons to Shadow of the Colossus and of course Dark Souls have been made, I feel as if Titan Souls strays away from the formula of those two and makes something entirely unique. But the underlying question is whether that uniqueness comes at a price, and in this man's honest opinion, it most definitely does. As far as I can tell through my research, Titan Souls is the first of 4 games developed by Acid Nerve, none of which I've played besides this one. It was actually originally a Flash game that runs like shit, even on a computer with a GTX 960, so I wouldn't recommend playing it. Enjoy this fact or not, the first work and/or works that a person makes usually have a ton of glaring issues, and due to this, one can see the obvious problems that Titan Souls contains. Unlike what a lot of you may believe, my main issue with Titan Souls isn't really its difficulty, but rather the fact that it just isn't that interesting of a game for me to care about. Let's get into why. Now this game contains next to no story. You're basically a lone warrior collecting these objects called Titan Souls, which will do something. Yeah, the game doesn't really specify what exactly your quest's ending point is, and the ending itself, well, more on that later. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Since the game contains no story, I didn't really feel inspired to finish the game since I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But I ended up beating the game to the sound of my screaming voice. You have only one weapon, a minuscule bow, and one defense mechanism, which is the roll feature. That's pretty much a rip-off of the rolling mechanic from the Zelda games. But the good news is that every boss dies in one hit, so this game should be pretty simple to play, right? Wrong! Guess what? These bosses can also kill you in one hit. And, unlike you, have massive defenses that are impenetrable unless you find a weakness that is incredibly difficult to find. There's a ton of combat applications that the Titans also know that can be incredibly difficult to dodge, so that's always fun. For a taste of the combat experience, let's look at this Yeti asshole from the ice stage. This Yeti's primary form of attack is acting like he's a freaking Pokemon and using rollout to immediately smash into you before you can do anything. He also throws his balls at your face which push you backwards until eventually pushing you into a wall and killing you. His last form of attack are these icicles that fall from the ceiling and try and murder your ass by stabbing you. Taking all of that into consideration, a measly dodge roll, a bow, and an arrow make the statement "you are under-equipped for this fight" the largest understatement of all time. The bullshit doesn't stop there though, oh no, because can you guess where his weakness is? That's right, his weakness is on his booty! So not only do you have to simultaneously dodge like 2 to 3 attacks at the same time, but also be able to fire your arrow straight at the guy's backside while he's constantly facing forward. This is a complete bitch to have to do, and I died like 50 times on this guy alone. Difficulty isn't actually the only detriment to Titan Souls' boss fights though, and that's because there's also the issue of some bosses having ambiguity in their weak points. Let's take this lovely gentleman here, Knight Elathon, the legendary Titan Slayer. So here I am walking into this boss fight and wait, what am I supposed to do? I see this skeleton gentleman right up on the boss stage and this big purple arrow thing on a pillar. My first instinct was to shoot the skeleton man, since I figured that's the boss. But unfortunately I guess I was a stupid idiot asshole because the arrow deflects off of the stage. Okay, so I guess I'm supposed to fire at the purple arrow thing. Yep. I guess I was, but if I was still 5 years old and I didn't know what I was doing, this would be Carnival Night Zone from Sonic 3 all over again with that fucking barrel. So the fight commences and of course he starts firing his giant purple arrow right at me, and I immediately notice that his arrow gives a break in the pillar. So then I figure that, oh hey, the pillars break when the knight fires an arrow at them. This must mean that my mission in this stage is to get the knight to break all the pillars. Several deaths later, and I finally got all the pillars broken, but yeah, that didn't do anything. So then I was scouring my brain looking for this guy's weakness until I accidentally fire my arrow at his arrow and it stuns both me and him in place, exposing his skeleton. So then I'm like, alright, we're getting somewhere, let's fire right at him. And he's already respawned his armor before I could even get a hit on him. Finally I clue in that the proper strategy is to hit the arrow while the knight is close, so I can retract my arrow as fast as possible and get my shot in on him. Having to figure out all that bullshit on top of how difficult the boss itself is actually made that less of an exercise in fun, and more of an exercise in absolute unadulterated frustration. As you can see, this is not a game for the faint of heart, and there are many more examples of this kind of boss design scattered throughout the game. I wouldn't have so much of a problem with this kind of boss if there was something more to this game. And unfortunately, that's not the case at all. Quite the opposite, actually. This game is absolutely nothing to its level design whatsoever. I've been holding out on this comparison in particular for a while now, but let's look at another one of this game's many inspirations, Zelda: Link to the Past. The great thing about Link to the Past is that sure, it had great boss fights, but that wasn't the only good thing about it. There was also level design in the form of dungeons, NPCs to converse with, a fully fleshed out world. Titan Souls has absolutely none of that. The world of Titan Souls is absolutely barren, with nothing to do in it, and the worst part is that the world is absolutely gigantic. This makes the game 10 times more tedious, since it's very easy to get lost in this boring ass world, trying to look for some of the more difficult to find boss fights. I'm not exactly asking for a Link to the Past quality game, because I understand that's incredibly difficult to make, but at least give me something interesting to look at in this world. This game is basically an odd simultaneous upgrade and downgrade of the games you'd probably find in your local arcade. If this game were inside of an arcade cabinet instead of my PS4, it probably would have sucked all the quarters out of my pocket from the aforementioned Yeti boss fight alone, but I probably would have never pressed on due to the environments being about 6 times more bland than golden axes. Spawn points could also be positioned in much better places. I hate how I constantly have to walk all the way over to the boss fight every single time I die. I'm a lazy asshole. If I die to the boss, why don't I just spawn right in front of the boss door? It makes sense why a game like Dark Souls wouldn't do this, because in Dark Souls you might want to reassess your situation, grind for souls, and get better equipment before tackling the boss again. In this game, there's no equipment other than a bow and arrow, so the lack of good respawning results in it being incredibly tedious to keep playing. Hard mode isn't bad, but I also sort of expected a little more from it. All it is at the time of this writing is a sped up version of the game, which you can probably guess how well that works out. I also think the concept of you being almost as powerful as every boss in the game might sound good on paper, but in practice it leaves me feeling incredibly empty on the inside when I defeat a foe I worked so hard to achieve on in order to get something that is just gonna get me more boss fights. Speaking of working hard on something without any great results, share this review around because I probably took longer than you think creating it, and it sucks that I only get 200 views on these things. Despite what I have said though, I still managed to push myself to the end point of this game after 8 straight days of playing it. Even though the environments are blander than a piece of white bread, the sprite work and the sheer scale of the world is notable for being incredibly impressive. Unlike Shadow of the Colossus, the environments are actually kind of varied, and add to the excitement of exploring the world of Titan Souls. The animations on the moving characters and objects in Titan Souls also look absolutely stunning, due to being a solid 60 frames per second, no matter your platform of choice. Much like Zelda, I can constantly have fun simply by way of movement in the game due to this. Also, while the bosses are bullshit, I still get a huge kick out of the character designs, and I honestly think this is something that the game does better than the aforementioned inspirations I was talking about. This game is a way of making you feel like you're a little kid again, by making the experience of Titan Souls truly unexpected. Bosses come in a variety of designs, ranging from a Hydra, a big blob of slime with a brain, a giant tiki mask that shoots balls at you, and a big block with an eyeball in it that shoots lasers at you. Granted, Dark Souls and Zelda had some pretty creative fights, but both only had one boss per area. Titan Souls has multiple, and Shadow of the Colossus had to have a consistent tone with its boss fights to fit the game of isolation, followed by grandeur, which was contained in that game. I suppose I also enjoy some of the boss gimmicks, at least the ones that are more easy to figure out, like this plant monster who sucks in your arrow, and you have to summon your arrow back to you in order to expose the plant's weak point. The atmosphere of this game is also fantastic. The music sounds absolutely amazing, and it really helps build up some immersion in this game, despite some of the battles being incredibly goofy, and the final boss is truly a sight to behold, but I won't exactly spoil what it looks like, should you want to try this game for yourself. It's around 16 bucks Canadian on Steam, which I would recommend waiting for a sale since I think that's already far too expensive for this game. And I warn you right now, this concept has been already done, and done better, by games like Link to the Past and Shadow of the Colossus. Don't forget to subscribe if you actually like this video, so I have an incentive to make more, and I'll see you in the next one if I can bother to get my lazy ass up again.